2022. Could I have a roll call, please?
Director Dye?
Here.
Director Lohman?
Here.
Director Clark?
Here.
Director Penrose?
Here.
Director Boyd, alternate
Here.
for Director Slater-Carter, right?
Yes, here.
Chair Raddock?
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum.
Okay. So we're moving on to item number two, public comment. If you're participating by phone, you can raise your hand *9 and you can unmute yourself with *6. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this time?
I see Greg.
Greg, go ahead.
Sorry, I missed the last meeting. I mailed in some public comment questions. I was pleased to see some progress on some of the items I had asked about the electrical building, and I see that you're pursuing a grant to make major repairs there, so that's good. But I wondered about two related things. When we had the peak flows on December 13th, if I remember correctly, it was exceeded the plant's capacity of 15 million gallons per day. Now that's an instant measurement. That's not a flow for an entire day. That's just a peak flow rate. In this case, it was about an hour. And that caused an overflow that was rescued by using a portable pump. And I wondered, A, have we done anything like sandbags or something to protect the electrical building in the short run while we wait a year or whatever to fix the electrical building? And then secondly, I wondered about the wet weather storage south of the plant. I saw the wet-dry comparison statistics, but those mask the problem. The problem was we got 12 million gallons a day rate at peak from the south, and that's what we couldn't handle. We got actually, it looks like more I&I from the north, but it was smooth because there's wet weather storage upstream in the intertie pipeline system. So it would seem logical to add some wet weather storage south, and I just wondered if anything's going on there. So that's two questions, one about the emergency or short-term fixes to protect the electrical building, and the other about the longer-term issue. Thanks.
Yes, you have a question about Half Moon Bay, you can contact John Dowdy, our Public Works Director. A lot of what you have published recently on social media is incorrect. He's happy to correct that for you, and he will at some point. But if you have Half Moon Bay business, deal directly with the city of Half Moon Bay. Thank you. And the staff have any response on the electrical?
Yes, we are getting prepared. I don't know whether we'll have storm events like what we had in December, but definitely we have sandbags ready in case we come up with something. We'll take care of that and take some measures immediately. Thank you very much.
On the electrical update, it is just an update. We have a study already, so we expect to have new information by middle of March, and the board could be ready to, act in April, but of course it'll be part of the budget discussion as well. So if I'm wrong about that, staff, feel free to correct me.
No, that's absolutely correct. We're expecting to get the update of the technical memorandum by mid-March, after which we will take it to the planning subcommittee, and then further on take it to the board sometime in April.
Sounds good. Do we have any other public speakers? I don't see any. So I think we'll move on to the consent agenda. Does anyone wish to pull an item or make a motion to approve?
I'd like to ask a couple of questions about the disbursements.
Mm-hmm. Go for it, Matt.
Two questions. On page 12, there's a payment to Century, $4,900 for BOD monitoring. I'm wondering, what does that mean? Was it monitoring an influent and or effluent at the plant, or was it elsewhere near a suspected source, or what exactly are they monitoring?
They are monitoring, if I may respond to your question, Director Clark. We are planning on getting a new type of equipment which measures the critical carbon content or critical carbon residual content, CCR, which can relate to the BOD or COD. We're planning on getting that probably next month. And that'll be an online BOD or COD, which it'll measure and pass it on to a SCADA system. So we are planning on installing it first in our primary, the primary effluent, and check it out. And then we'll see where else we need to install it. We're just trying it out for the first time. It's a pilot thing, which costs about $4,900 for a period of 6 months. So since it was not very expensive, we wanted to try it out. We're getting that equipment from Canada, and that's like a probe, which actually gets into the water, and by calibrating it earlier to a known sample of COD or BOD, we can interpret the actual measurements on real-time basis. So that'll help us in the process and see what action we need to take care. So we will let the board know when we get that equipment, probably in the month of April, and people can come and have a look at the equipment.
So Sentry installed that?
No, not as yet. We have just ordered for the equipment.
Okay. Well, that sounds like an excellent idea. Then the other is just an oddity I noticed on, with all the other employees on page 16, directors Lohman, Ruddock, and Penrose are shown, their checks are shown along with all the regular other employees. On the previous page, there's 3 other directors, Dye, Slater, Carter, and Clark, are just 3 people listed in a very short table on an otherwise blank page and we're also employees. So I'm wondering is there any significance to that, or why is it presented that way?
Yeah, I can
Presented,
address that.
it is presented. Sorry.
Yeah, those, the employees that are included, the directors that are included with the employees are the ones that have direct deposit, while the ones that aren't included are the ones that get a payroll check. That's the only difference.
That's simple enough. Thank you.
Yeah, Director Clark, if you see the respective pages, it's got the heading there which says payroll check register checks, payroll check register direct deposits.
Right.
Are you satisfied with staff responses there, Matt?
Yes, I am. And if no one else has questions, I will move that we pass the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I believe Director Penrose has a question.
I have a comment. I would like to see us get our agendas a little earlier in the week so that questions like this, which can be answered quickly by staff with an email or a phone call before the meeting, don't take up meeting time. That's my comment, and I will second the motion.
Okay, could I have a roll call, please?
Director Dye? You're muted, Director Dye.
Sorry, aye.
Director Lohman?
Yes.
Director Clark?
Aye.
Director Penrose?
Aye.
Director Boyd?
Aye.
Chair Ruddock?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. So moving on to regular business, item 4A, a presentation on first flush report by the San Mateo County RCB.
Yeah, so we have the people from San Mateo Resource Conservation District who are going to give us a short presentation. But just to give a background, this is the first rain program, or also called as a first flush program, which is normally done every year. This is primarily at the first onset of the big rain or the rain, and the contaminants, which are generally on roads and parking lots and fields, are washed away, and that's when these measurements are taken. And this time it was on October 20th, 2021, when 24 volunteers sampled creeks and stormwater outfalls between Pacifica and Half Moon Bay. So water samples were collected, and we will hear it now from RCD to give a short presentation on the results. So we have Noah and Nicole from RCD, and over to you, Noah.
Thank you, Kitchen. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having us. Nicole Schmidt, our Water Quality Program Coordinator, is going to be giving the presentation this evening. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm the Water Quality Program Manager at the San Mateo Resource Conservation District. And I'll be here to answer questions and assist any way I can. So take it away, Nicole.
So good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, I'm going to allow you, just give me a second. Yep.
Great.
There you go.
All right. Great. Can everyone see the screen, the presentation? Awesome. So yes, I'm Nicole. For those of you who do not know me, I see some familiar faces in the room. It's great to see everyone. And I'm excited to share with you some of the results from this year's First Flush. So in this presentation, I will talk about the pollutants that we measured, summarize some of our key findings, mention some solutions to water quality issues in the area, and answer some questions. So some background of the San Mateo RCD. We're a local hub for conservation, helping the people of San Mateo build a more thriving community for all. We are here to help people help the land. We have grown over the years to focus on 5 main areas: water, climate, wildlife, agriculture, and fire and forest health. So what exactly is First Flush? First Flush occurs with the first significant rain of the season. The RCD runs the First Flush program in San Mateo, where we recruit volunteers to help sample water and record field data. And when it's not rained for a while and the rains finally come, pollutants that have accumulated in the watershed during the dry season get picked up by the rain and enter our storm drains, creeks, and ocean. And this storm water carries pollutants such as bacteria that can make people sick. So the RCD and our partners gather water samples from local creeks during the first rain to see what the overall health of our watersheds look like and where there are areas that we can focus on to improve water quality. So a watershed is an area of land where water naturally drains to a larger water body like a creek or a lake or the ocean. On the coast side, our water eventually ends up in the ocean, the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which is pictured here. And our everyday activities and the choices that we make have a really large impact on the health of our watersheds. Like when you're driving down Devil Slide and you have your car brakes on, the metals from the brake pads end up in our waterways. Also, any fertilizers or pesticides that individuals might use in their home gardens also get carried through stormwater to local creeks in the ocean and have a really large impact on the water quality and wildlife. I just want to take a moment to thank all of our dedicated volunteers. This is a completely community-based volunteer event. We could not run the First Flush program without participation from the community who engage in citizen science and help us collect water samples, field data, and measurements. Here are a few photos taken from this year's First Flush by a few of our volunteers. You can see groups collecting water samples, taking field notes, and having fun. And we ask a lot from our volunteers. They're required to attend a training and be on call. Since we can't control the weather, it can be a bit tricky to know when to call First Flush. And as you can see here, sometimes it can occur in the dark. I also want to take a moment to thank all of our partners and sponsors who make this program possible. The Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, we're actually one of 3 counties that participate in the First Flush, along with Santa Cruz and Monterey counties. The Sewer Authority Midcoastside, San Mateo Harbor District, the Surfrider Foundation, the City of Pacifica, and the County of San Mateo Health System. So now that we have discussed a little bit about how our everyday choices impacts water quality, let's talk about why water quality monitoring during First Flush is important. Monitoring helps to identify what pollutants are of greatest concern and where. Monitoring also helps to provide information to support informed water quality management decisions and establishes a continuous and consistent water quality data set, so we can see if our water quality is improving over time or not. Some of our sites have data from 2009, so it's really great to see the overall trend of many of our historical sites. I'm now going to go over what pollutants we test for and why. Here's an overview of all the pollutants we look for, some of their potential causes, and the sources of these pollutants in our waterways and some of their ecological impacts. I'll break this down a little and go over each pollutant category one at a time. First, we look for fecal indicator bacteria, specifically E. coli and Enterococcus. Potential sources of fecal indicator bacteria include species from warm-blooded animals, particularly in this area, pets, cows, horses, and wildlife. Analyzing fecal indicator bacteria gives us an idea of the amount of pathogens in the water that could be harmful for human health. Next, we look at two different nutrients, nitrates and orthophosphates. Nitrogen and phosphorus are primary nutrients that support the growth of plants, which is why they are common ingredients in pesticides and fertilizers. But too much of these nutrients in the water can lead to eutrophication that can cause harmful algae blooms that take away the oxygen in the water. So this can cause fish die-offs and kill other aquatic organisms. We also look at the presence of metals in the water samples. Specifically, we look for copper, zinc, and lead. These leach into the waterways from gutters, roofs, brake pads, industrial waste, paint, and fire, and impact human health and cause reduced reproduction in marine mammals. Another parameter we identify are total suspended solids, which leach into the waterways from construction sites, erosion, agricultural runoff, and fires. Total suspended solids attract charged particles such as pesticides and metals and impact the water column visibility and the ability of aquatic and marine organisms to respire. We also ask volunteers to record physical and chemical properties of the water, such as electrical conductivity, temperature, and pH. And we ask volunteers to record field observations. Connectivity tells us if we correctly identified the first flush. Rain has a relatively low electrical conductivity compared to water that has been flowing through the creek for a while. So if conductivity is low, then we know we are looking at data that is influenced by the rain, not just normal stream flow data. We also record temperature, since temperatures that are outside the healthy range have a negative ecological impact. And observations give us context to the data, like if there was any trash present or any bubbles, that could be a sign of pollution. Identifying these observations helps us understand the data more. So now that we have gone through an overview of the RCD, first flush, and pollutants we look for and why, I want to summarize some of our key findings. Here is a map of all the sites that we sampled from this year. San Pedro and Pacifica was our northernmost site, and Kelly Avenue and Half Moon Bay is the southernmost site. The only site that we did not have water at was Montero Creek, so we sampled a total of 13 sites. Here's a close-up of some of the sites that are in Pillar Point Harbor, since it's kind of difficult to spot those on the previous map. We have a lot of historical sites here, like West Point and Vassar Drainage. Here's the all-site map again and a summary of some of our key findings. We found that Enterococcus, E. coli, orthophosphates, and copper had sites that were above the recommended amount considered safe for swimming. In other words, some or all sites had concentrations of these pollutants that were above the pollution threshold. While there were no concerns observed for nitrates, lead, zinc, or total suspended solids at the sites we sampled this year. This is an example of how we analyze each pollutant. This graph shows the E. coli concentrations in all sites in the 1 to 10 dilution. The y-axis represents the E. coli concentration, and the x-axis shows the sites we sampled from north to south. That red line indicates the water quality objective, which is that pollution threshold or the limit of what the concentration should be to be considered safe for swimming. Any concentration that is above that red line does not meet the water quality objective. So all sites except for San Vicente Creek were well above the recommended range, meaning that if people swam during this first flush event, there's a good chance they could get sick. And that orange line at the top of the graph represents the upper limit of detection. So those sites that reach that upper limit have even more E. coli than can be detected in this 1 to 10 dilution. So we asked the lab that we take the samples to also measure E. coli concentrations in the 1 to 100 dilution. The 1 to 100 dilution gives us a better picture of where the sites are in comparison to each other. So you can see Surfer South has the highest concentration of E. coli at around 141,000 mpn per 100 milliliters. During this year's first flush, San Vicente Creek was within the recommended ranges for E. coli concentrations at around 100. There is a lot of community interest about San Vicente Creek, so this is a really promising piece of information that E. coli levels did not exceed the pollution threshold this year. So we hope this trend will continue, but we're going to keep an eye on the E. coli levels here in the future. We also look at historical data for many of our sites. This graph shows the lead concentrations over time. The y-axis shows the lead concentrations and the x-axis shows the year. And each site is indicated by a different color line. And that red dash is again the water quality objective or pollution threshold. So take a look at that yellow line. This represents Vassar drainage. You can see pictured on the top left. Vassar drainage is located in Pillar Point Harbor. And we noticed that lead concentrations here had increased in 2019 and 2020. So we wanted to keep an eye on the lead concentrations at this site to see if they were going to continue to increase in 2021. This year, lead concentrations at Vassar were within the recommended range and did not exceed the pollution threshold. So we do not see a problem with lead concentrations at this site, but we're going to continue to keep an eye on it. Here's the historical graph for copper. Again, the y-axis represents the copper concentrations while the x-axis shows the year. So take a look at that green line. This represents San Vicente Creek mouth, pictured on the left. This year, San Vicente had elevated levels of copper more than any other site. And this is something that we have not seen before at San Vicente. So we want to keep an eye on this for next year. And here's another snapshot summary of the first flush results this year. Surfer South had the highest concentrations of E. coli and Enterococcus. West Point Avenue had the highest concentrations of orthophosphates, and San Vicente had the highest concentration of copper. So now that we have discussed the first flush results, I want to briefly talk about some things that we can do to improve water quality and the health of our ecosystems. The RCD offers many programs that improve water quality and promote water conservation and resiliency, from harvesting roof rainwater in greenhouses and residences with rain barrels to installing stormwater gardens, water bars, and permeable pavements. The RCD works wherever it is needed to accomplish water quality improvement and conservation. If you're interested in learning more about any of these techniques, this stormwater booklet goes into more detail. It is very useful in assisting landowners in greening stormwater runoff and is available on our website and free to use. We can send it to you if you're interested. It contains information for homeowners in greening their home to slow, spread, and sink stormwater runoff. And the RCD is happy to offer any technical assistance and support if anyone is interested in implementing these types of projects. Thank you. Noah and I now welcome any questions.
Matthew, go ahead.
Thank you. I noticed that the first flush this year was done after a rain of 7/100ths of an inch, which doesn't seem like very much. And I'm surprised that some of the smaller drainages even came out to the ocean. Is that a good amount for the purposes of this study?
Oh, you want me to take this one? Yeah, so for the first flush, we normally, in Half Moon Bay, normally need about 1/10 of an inch of rain minimum. And then we need, that's usually enough to have sheet and overland runoff. So that's about 7 times what it's kind of our minimum. And some of our other criteria are, which are a little subjective, or we also needed to continue rain long enough for get the volunteers out there and actually allow them to go out and collect their samples and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's pretty good amount for the Half Moon Bay area. It gets a little complicated when just the kind of heterogeneity so prevalent that a storm can be, really over Half Moon Bay, not over Pacifica, for example. And another example of that is a couple years ago, we tried to run First Flush down in Pescadero, and that is such a heavily wooded area that it requires so much more rain to have overland runoff that we weren't able to run it for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks after that. Does that answer your question, Matt?
Yes, but if you just said you had 7 times, you want a tenth of an inch, and you had 7 times that. The report says 0.07
Oh,
so maybe that's a typo.
I believe that's just a typo.
That must be a typo. We got 0.7 inches this year.
That explains it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, and that is, every year this comes out, and I try to figure out where St. Augustine Creek is, and I'm sure now what people here in El Granada call Deer Creek, and is shown on the latest USGS maps with that label. So where does St. Augustine come in?
That's the name I've always been told. I mean, the outfall's it's that large kind of double pipe outfall at Capistrano Beach.
Right, it's just inside the breakwater, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure where the RC got that name from, but that's what I've always known it as. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
I just wanted to say thank you to the RCD for doing this project, and I'm glad Sam is supportive of it. I think it's valuable for us to take a look at these items. I did have a quick question, which is, can you just talk about the source of the E. coli bacteria? Because I know people sort of jump to the idea that it must be human, but I think from what I know about this whole process in the past testing, it's generally more animals, and everybody needs to clean up their dog poop, right? Can you speak to that for a minute? Thanks.
Sure. Sorry, Nicole. I'll take this one as well. So yeah, I would say there are many sources of that bacteria, and just for quick reminders, that fecal indicator bacteria is not itself pathogenic. It's not likely to get anyone sick, but it kind of points us in the direction of where pathogens might be, and those are usually associated with poop, essentially. And that can come from wildlife, it can come from pets, it can come from humans, although we don't see a ton of evidence of that. One of the things that we do is, not during the First Flush, but in many of our other programs, is we do microbial source tracking, which allows us to do a kind of DNA analysis of the bacteria and look at which animals it may have come from. And we don't have, it's pretty expensive, so we don't have a huge amount of that information, but what we have done doesn't consistently point to humans. Dogs are one of the many sources, but certainly not the most important source. And we found actually on beaches where a lot of this pollution is kind of concentrated that we don't see a lot of detection of dog, but that more comes from kind of the upper watersheds coming down from the creeks and that sort of thing. And then, sorry, go ahead, Barbara.
If it's coming from there, what's it coming from? Wildlife?
Wildlife is one of the sources. But wildlife is not really considered one of the controllable sources. We're certainly not advocating for like culling of wildlife, for example. But there are times when it comes from humans. It could be a leak somewhere. There could be someone illegally dumping something, or any number of sources. But yeah, I mean, we look at this in terms of what's controllable, and the reason that we focus on dogs. We have this big outreach and education program. The reason that we focus on dogs is just because it is a source that you can target through outreach and education, rather than it being the most important source that needs to be addressed. So it's a complicated picture, but essentially there's one of the things that we can do, certainly as those of you who own dogs, is to pick up after your pets.
Are there grazing operations in the upper watershed that might be of interest?
So there are some grazing operations. There's some equestrian operations. We work with. So there's some risk of pollution from those as well, and we can do the MST testing for cows and for horses, and we do find those sometimes. And so we work with those operations where we can try to implement. A lot of it's operational, cleaning up before rain and that kind of thing, and having good manure management practices. And there are other things kind of more in depth, like stormwater management practices, which can vary in complication. But yeah, there's also to complicate the picture things. So not to get too scientific here, but so things from animals we consider primary sources, and then there are things we can talk about as secondary sources, and these are things like sediments or even fats, oils, and grease in a stormwater line, which is something we discovered a number of years ago, and those can actually be places where the fecal indicator bacteria we're interested in testing can kind of harbor and proliferate, but outside of the gut biome of warm-blooded animals. So we don't really know if they're connected to those pathogens, which is what we're really interested in. So it seems to be that these secondary sources can actually just kind of breed these bacteria, but it's not a one-to-one relation that can indicate kind of public health threat. So it's
Scott?
Thank you, Noah and Nicole. Thank you. This is great information and the kind of stuff that only real water nerds would go after year after year. So thank you for your continual diligence on this. I'm curious, when you see a spike like you saw in the copper at San Vicente, do you do any kind of chasing that later in the year, or do you have any thoughts on where a spike like that might come from?
So we conveniently, or however you want to put it, we have a long-term monitoring project on San Vicente Creek, so we do go out there pretty often, and we're able to check in on that. If that happened somewhere we don't go to a lot, we'd make it out there anyway. And we haven't seen any red flags and we work with most people in that watershed. So we've looked around and haven't seen any red flags. So I think it might just be kind of a one-off, but not really sure. People do tend to throw some stuff in the creek at two different points. Yeah. Not sure where exactly that came from, but we're certainly interested in looking into it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Barbara, do you have another question?
It's a cricket. Next door just the other day, they were posting information about people pulling barrels of something awful out of San Vicente Creek. They had pictures of these barrels that had been pulled out of the creek that people had dumped into the creek. So something to look at.
Thank you, Barbara. I haven't seen it. Do you have any idea where on the creek it was? No. Okay, we'll check that out. Thanks.
Any other questions for the RCD team?
Sorry, I was muted. I think that those photographs were where Etheldor crosses San Vicente Creek at that bridge.
And I'd just like to say thank you to the RCD for doing all this.
Thank you, RCD.
Thanks, everyone. Actually, sorry, I realized I forgot to raise this earlier. So many thanks to Sam for continued partnership in this project. I think it's really, really valuable for the community. About 3 years ago, I think we raised this at one of these meetings, and it was sort of I wasn't here at the time, so I'm not sure if the funding request went to a vote or what that process is. But I believe our agreement for 3 years has now come to an end. So I just wanted to bring that up and hope that we can continue this partnership and receive further support from Sewer Authority Midcoastside. So is that something, Kitchen, that I should bring to another meeting, make that request?
Yes, Noah, we can talk offline and then bring it to the meeting later.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Noah and Nicole, and of course to RCD.
And Half Moon Bay will talk about partnering as well.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Moving on to item 4B, update on fats, oils, and grease inspection at GCSD and NWSD establishments.
So SAM conducts its fats, oils, and grease inspection for GCSD and MWSD, while for Half Moon Bay carry it out themselves. And by coincidence, all three establishments use the same consultant, which is Mark Thomas, but they've been done at different times. Now, to give you an idea about the fog inspection, what SAM is carrying out, we've been doing it as far as I could go back. I could check from 2015. That's when I joined the company. Inspections have been conducted every year. And in the first year in 2015, when I was there, it was being done by West Bay Sanitary District. And thereafter, from 2016 to 2019, we had a staff person who was certified fog specialist and who was able to do the fog inspections. And that staff person retired in 2019, and then we started subbing it out. So in 2020, it was conducted by Norm Domingo from Freyer and Loretta Consultants. And last year, we subbed it out to Mark Thomas. So Mark Thomas started the inspection last year in the month of October. And in all, about 8 establishments in MWSD and 24 establishments in GCSD were performed. The inspection was performed on these establishments. And we have the team from Mark Thomas. I have Ben Porter and his team. I think his Sonny is there. So Ben will give a short presentation on the fog inspection. Over to you, Ben.
Okay, good evening. I'm gonna try to share my screen. Okay, is that working?
Yes, it is, but the PowerPoint is not there on the screen.
Well, so what are you seeing?
We're seeing all your chat and other stuff.
Uh-oh.
Awful.
Yep.
How about now?
We've all been there.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I put it on the wrong screen, so I apologize if I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at a different screen. But yes, my name is Ben Porter. I'm division manager for the Cupertino District Management Office for Mark Thomas. And we, among other things, we do manage 3 sanitation districts, and we also have been providing some services to Half Moon Bay and recently also to SAM. To SAM, not including Half Moon Bay. So that means just doing the fog inspections for SAM, for Granada and Montara. So I apologize if I'm gonna give you too much information or pictures that are a little bit too gross, but Kishan asked me to give you guys an update. So I'm gonna start out with just a quick few slides on some background and then get down to the nitty gritty at the end. So what is FOG? In case you don't know, FOG is basically just an acronym for fats, oil, and grease. And that can come from a combination of animal fat or vegetable oils that are used primarily to prepare food. And they can also be found in food. The problem with FOG, when you're talking about sewer systems, is that when they're discharged into the sewer lines, fog accumulates and sticks to pipe walls, causing blockages and backups in the sanitary sewer system. And then if it becomes significant, it can be a really big deal. It comes from residential homes, and then high density homes and complexes can be a bigger source of fog, and food service establishments. Food service establishments is where you're going to get the highest concentration of fog if they're not properly controlled. And of course, I grew up in a household where my mother used to collect fat from cooking in a jar, and she would put it under the sink, and I never knew why when I was a kid. It wasn't until I dedicated my life to this that I realized why my mom was storing fat underneath the sink. But just so you know, shouldn't be putting all the fat and grease down the sink. Do whatever you can to just collect it and throw it away if you can. So the restaurants in the SAM service area are required to have some sort of grease control device. And a grease control device can be really any kind of 3 different types. gravity grease interceptor would be usually for like a large scale industrial facility, would be the type that would normally have a gravity grease interceptor. And then more common in restaurants would be hydromechanical interceptor, which is like an in-floor grease trap. Or also another type of hydromechanical interceptor would just be under the sink. So that's the background. Kishan really just asked me to tell you what we did and also give you the results. So that's this exciting part of the presentation. So typically when we start this type of process, we like to make sure that the facilities know that we're coming so that we don't surprise them, and also so we don't scare them and create a hostile relationship off the bat. So what Kishan did with my support is we put together a letter, basically just notifying all of the establishments that we would be coming. There's an example of this letter. They were all the same. Basically, just came from Kishan with the SAM border and told them that we were going to be dropping by at some point. And that's exactly what we did. We didn't call beforehand. We just showed up with the letter in our hand in case the mail didn't get delivered or the mail didn't get open, which happens from time to time, especially during these times, I guess. But we had the letter. Everybody had actually received the letter by the time we got there, and we found the facilities to be very, very cooperative. That wasn't a problem. We didn't really know what to expect, but that was not a problem. And so once we give them the letter, we ask if we can do an inspection. Tell them that we're just going to walk through the facility, look at their operations, talk about some of their housekeeping practices, and then finally get to the area where the fog ends up and where the fog should be controlled. Best case scenario, we do all this stuff on the first day, and an hour or two later, the facility passes the inspection. We give them a copy of the inspection report, and we schedule another inspection for 12 months later. This is an example of an inspection report. I did not hide the name of this inspection report because this inspection report came off swimmingly. This is an example of what we would like an inspection report to look like. Everything was checked for being compliant, and everything went perfectly well. We look at the records of the maintenance. We look at the sinks. We look at the floor drains. We consider if there are drain problems. We also look at mop sinks. I mean, if they're frying food or if they're grilling food, there's a good chance that grease can get in the air and then fall on the ground, and then it could go in through the mop drains as well. We look at the dishwasher, whether or not it's connected, and also see if there's a grinder. Look at the floor mats and a tallow bin as well. And for this example, everything was compliant and they passed, and that was what we're hoping for. This is an example of some pictures that we take at every inspection. This grease control device was actually being cleaned when we were there. So that's a good sign because we know that it was, it's being maintained. And this is an example of one of the tests that we do, which is we test the hydraulic depth of the grease control device, which is basically just the depth from the bottom of the device to the top of the water surface, including the fats and the oils and the grease, which actually go to the top of the water. And then we use one term in the wastewater industry would be like a sludge judge, typically used in wastewater treatment processes. We have a kind of a mini version of that for looking at grease control devices, where we're able to get a sample, a representative sample of the control device throughout the height of the control device. And this is a picture of where the fat and the oil and the grease is sitting compared to where the water that doesn't have as much fat, oil, and grease is. And our test is that the percentage of the fat, oil, and grease needs to be less than 25% of the total volume or the total height of the cylinder. And these are some other pictures of some of the manifests and also of the tallow bins. And then we have some pictures of some places that aren't so great. And those names have been hidden from public view here. So these are just some examples where basically the whole sample of the grease control device was fat, oil, and grease. Technically, the measurement was 71.5% of the device, but in some cases we just can't even really take a measurement because it's just completely full and it hasn't been emptied on a regular basis. This is an example of something that we didn't even take a sample here in this photo, because this is just a grease control device that's completely full of fat, oil, and grease. So finally, for the results, 32 total facilities, 24 of them are El Granada, 8 is Montara. Of the 32, 15 passed the first time. So not terrible, a little less than half passed the first time. We rescheduled the second inspection for 17 facilities. Typically, we try to schedule that within about 2 weeks. In most cases, they either need to perform maintenance on their grease control device. That's the most common requirement. And we certainly don't want to let them just continue to operate the way that they are for a long period of time without maintaining their grease control device, and allow them to keep doing that before we come back. So 2 weeks is a reasonable amount of time for them to get somebody out there to clean out the device. So we did follow-up inspections. Again, about half, a little less than half of the 17, 8 passed, 9 failed. And what I discussed with Kishan is that usually you give people basically 3 chances, and if they don't pass on the 3rd shot, then you kind of need to take another approach. So after the first follow-up inspection, we had 9 more to do, and of those 9, 8 passed, 1 did not pass, and that non-compliant establishment, they just don't have their grease interceptor installed correctly. We told them that the first time, told them that the second time, told them that the 3rd time. So at this point, I don't know that going out there anymore is going to make much of a difference. But that's where we are. We did up to 3 inspections at the facilities, and 31 of the 32 are compliant. And that's really all I have for you tonight. I do have our most experienced fog inspector on the line with us. His name is Sonny Quach. I think it says Squatch for him. I don't know if he's got his camera on, but be happy to take some questions. And if I can't answer them, hopefully Sonny can. And if Sonny can't answer them, then I will get back to you.
Director Penrose.
Yes, thank you. That was a great presentation, and I'm really happy that we have such a good compliance record. But it does show you that we need to be inspecting. And I guess I have 2 questions. One is, how often do the grease detectors have to be cleaned? Is that something that gets done on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, an annual basis? And I'm sure that that's dependent on the amount of grease that they are collecting, but still, it is still a question. The second question is, what will the follow-up be once an establishment is found to be non-compliant, like the one out of the 32 that didn't pass the 3 different tests?
Okay, good questions. So the answer to the first question is really, you kind of answered the question yourself, but I'll just elaborate a little bit. It depends on how much grease they're generating, you know, how big of a restaurant it is, how fatty the food is that they're preparing. I mean, if it's a restaurant that is serving a lot of salads and not really any meat, then they're not going to have much of a problem. But if it's a steakhouse or something else, then it would be a different story. So it definitely depends on how much grease they're generating, but it also depends on how big their grease interceptor is. So it's all a volume-based thing. The fat, oil, and grease needs to rise to the top, allowing enough room in the in the volume of the interceptor for the water to flow through it. So if you're producing more grease, then you get a bigger interceptor, or you have to clean it more often. So Sonny, correct me if I'm wrong, but the typical sizing is set up based on what the expectation of the grease being generated is, so that it needs to be cleaned on approximately a 3-month schedule. But if the interceptor is a little bit undersized, then they would need to clean it more often than that. If the interceptor is bigger than it needs to be, I would still say you probably want to clean it every 3 months, just because there's also an issue with the fat, oil, and grease sitting in there for a long time. From a restaurant cleanliness perspective, not from a wastewater in the sewer system perspective. Sonny, is that correct? About 3 months is our regular recommendation?
Hello, everybody. My name is Sunny. So based on that, is the basic rule is always 25% or 30 days for the grease trap, and it's 25% or 90 days for the grease interceptor. And it's also depending on if the facility is producing too much grease within the time frame, we might require them to do more frequency cleaning. Probably if it's a grease interceptor, we're probably looking to maybe go down to 1.5 months, or the grease trap, we might bring it down to every 2 weeks. So depending on how much grease they produced.
And then, thank you, Sonny. And please quickly just remind me what the second question was.
Yeah, it's actually, it's become a 2-part question. With the group of establishments that failed the first test,
Okay.
Is there scheduled another recheck in 3 months, say, at a time when you would expect them to possibly be non-compliant again? And also, what is the follow-up when someone is non-compliant? What do you do? Do we close the establishment? Is there a fine? What's the procedure?
Okay, so your second question, which is really part question 1A, so the follow-up, so if they're not compliant, then we would normally schedule, we would typically want to keep an eye on them, but we wouldn't necessarily schedule another follow-up for them. But so what we would normally do is, okay, so the people who don't pass the third inspection, as I said before, they're probably not going to, no matter how many times we come out there, they're probably not going to change their behavior if they aren't given any other motivation. So what I would suggest is that SAM gives them a notice of violation and threaten to impose a fine on them. What I would also suggest is that while you may, and if you threaten to impose the fine on them, you also give them an opportunity to comply within a certain amount of time so that they don't actually have to pay the fine if they actually do make the change. Now, for the other part of your question about what to do about those people who didn't really look at, they weren't really in compliance until we told them that they weren't in compliance. So maybe they weren't following the rules, and maybe they won't follow the rules if they're not looked at. I think it would make sense to follow up with them in a more aggressive schedule than in 12 months. I mean, typically what the expectation is they're going to be inspected every 12 months. They're not going to know when they're going to be inspected. So they can't necessarily prepare for that inspection. It should seem like it's random, whether it is or not. But we also do inspect their maintenance records. So if we go a year without inspecting them, they're required to have maintenance records. And if they're required to have those, if they're required to show that they're cleaning their grease control device every 30 days, and we come out there a year later and they've only done it a couple times, then we know that they're not in compliant. But it all depends on how aggressive you want to monitor the situation. I mean, if you want to go back to all those places that that did not pass the first inspection, then of course that's something that you have every right to do.
Ben, could you please stop sharing the screen so that we can have everybody on the screen?
Yeah, I see that our counselor has his hand raised. Jeremy?
Just to follow up really quickly, I mean, there's where someone is repeatedly failing inspections. I mean, that's where both SAM and the member agencies have the ability to take enforcement action. The member agencies under their sewer use ordinances, and SAM under 19-01, and also other authorities. So those are things that we can evaluate with Kishen and then potentially the board as well. But enforcement, typically you want to start with the lower level of enforcement, notice of violation, notice to comply. And then to the extent that's unsuccessful, you would ratchet up the level of enforcement until you obtain compliance.
Thank you. That answers.
Kishen?
Yeah. Typically, we would just do 2 inspections. We would do the first inspection and then a follow-up inspection. And if somebody was not complying, then in the past we've sent a notice of violation. But due to the present pandemic situation and the hardships that the establishments are all going through, we decided that we must give them more chances to correct themselves. So that's why we went ahead and did 3 inspections this time. And it is actually being discussed with the member agency managers, especially the 2 of them, GCSD and MWSD, as how often we should do, because these are all pass-through inspections where SAM would be just billing the inspection cost to the member agencies. So we will discuss with them, and then we'll see what best we can do to continuously monitor these establishments. And one good way is also to probably teach the establishments how to measure the fat content themselves, so that if it's more than 25%, you know, they would anyway make sure that it gets clean rather than just visually seeing it.
Thank you.
I'm absolutely in favor of allowing establishments to correct bad practices. And if it's a matter of education or help, giving them help in doing it, I'm for that. But I also think there is absolutely no sense in doing inspections unless there is some sort of a follow-up pending the results of the inspection.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. I don't see any other hands raised. So I guess there's no action here. This is just to get an update on the FOG program.
Director Clark may have had his.
Director Clark, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to say that if we haven't gotten it yet, GCSD would certainly appreciate getting a full copy of the report as pertains to our district. And I will also say that we would be quite willing to help SAM to, particularly since we have the one non-compliant establishment, to let them know that there are more local eyes on them and that we're not going to leave them alone until they pass. So, yeah, please, if that information hasn't been sent, with the lists and who didn't pass, please send it and we'll get on it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. I'm going to move us along now to item C, approved side letter agreement between the Sewer Authority Midcoastside and the IUOE Local 39 regarding vacation accruals and administrative leave.
Yeah. So it's exactly 2 years since the pandemic started, when the board declared a local emergency. That was in March 2020. And due to the pandemic, a lot of staff could not take vacation, and a lot of hardships have been the staff had to undergo, and therefore last year, I think sometime in January of 2021, the board decided that the employees could cash out the vacation, whatever was in excess, because as per the MOU, they're not allowed to accumulate anything more than 400 hours of vacation. So a lot of staff was actually getting very close to maxing out or getting close to the 400 hours, and they would be losing the vacation. And this was brought to the board last year in January 2021, and the board of directors approved a side letter agreement which expired on June 30th, 2021. We are in the same situation right now. Of course, the pandemic is slowly decreasing, but still, staff has not been able to take vacation, and a lot of them are getting their vacation leave maxed out. And therefore, this is being brought to the board to see whether we could extend this year also and make it available until June 30th of 2022. The details of the cash out and other things are mentioned in the staff report, and I have our employment counsel, the special legal counsel, Christopher Boucher, also available, and staff is here to answer any questions.
Christopher, did you want to make any initial comments before moving forward to questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No other than to add that based on previous directions from the board, we've convened a discussion with it. IUOE Local 39, and they have expressed their appreciation to the board for the consideration of this item, as well as their support of this item. Thank you.
Questions for staff or legal counsel, directors? I don't see anything. Any members of the public? Actually, Scott Boyd.
I just want to say I don't get much opportunity to. I just want to. It says in the staff report, want to recognize employees for their commitment to SAM and doing their part to protect public health. I want to just put voice to that and say thank you, because the team has been diligent under extremely trying circumstances. And I know everyone has been, but SAM staff especially is, it's just hard to say thank you well enough for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. George Evans.
That's just an applause hand. It isn't a raised hand.
Fred.
Move to approve staff recommendation.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Director Dye? Director Dye, you're muted and probably not there.
Sorry, aye.
Okay. Director Lohman?
Bathroom,
Yes.
sorry.
Director Clark? You're muted, Director Clark. Director Clark.
Sorry. Aye.
Director Penrose.
Aye.
Director Boyd.
Aye.
Chair Radek.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Motion carries. Thank you, SAM staff, for all you do. Yay. All right, moving on to item D, approve a one-time cash out for certain unrepresented employees, leave balances for fiscal year 21-22.
I'll leave it to Chris to brief the board about it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. General Manager, and good evening, directors. This is a companion item to the previous item that we had just discussed. Since SAM has 2 unrepresented employees, that includes the general manager and the finance officer. The intent of this agenda item before you is to mimic what is being offered to the represented employees through Local 39. For the general manager and the finance officer, they also have some one-time leave that's either titled administrative leave or management leave. And similar to the supervisor of treatment concept, it would be to allow those additional cash out as well. And this is also identical to the item that you all approved last year as a companion item. And staff, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have. Thank you.
Do we have a motion?
I move per staff recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. Again, to staff. Roll call, please.
Director Dye.
Aye.
Director Lohman,
Yes.
Director Clark,
Aye.
Director Penrose,
Aye.
Director Boyd,
Aye.
Chair Ruddock.
Aye. Thanks, everyone. Item 5, General Manager's Report.
Anybody has any questions? Staff is here to answer. The complete packet is in the complete details are in the packet.
Scott?
Thank you. I just had a question. I know it's come up from time to time. I was just curious, are we participating as SAM in any of the COVID monitoring programs?
I didn't quite understand your question, Director Boyd.
Talking about, are we monitoring?
Oh, yeah. COVID monitoring program. Yes, we have put Sam in one of the monitoring programs. Actually, it ended last week. That was from a lab in the East Coast. And we used to send the samples out there. I think we've got about 12 or 14 samples. But we're in the process of starting another COVID monitoring program with Stanford. We are waiting for our general counsel to evaluate an agreement. And once we sign that agreement, then we'll get started. We're just waiting for that.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you. I'm eager that this kind of information can be used to help provide good intelligence about what's going on the ground. Thank you.
Good question. Matthew.
I am going to relay questions that I've been asked twice by the same constituent, and that is when the during high flow, when the wet weather storage facilities in the 2 northern districts come into play, where is the pipeline shut off? Pretty close.
Kishan, do you have an answer for that?
I didn't quite understand the question. When was the pipeline shut off?
Well, in December, the wet weather facilities outside the city stored water for because the flow from the city was so high. And where does the flow in the IPS stop when that happens?
Yeah, it goes into the wet weather storage expansion and wet weather storage, and it starts rising there till such time that the storm event subsides, and then it starts going automatically back into the wet well and starts in the pipeline.
So it's not actually, the pipeline's not closed off anywhere.
No, it's not closed off anywhere. We don't have a valve or anything which is shut off. It's just that it starts going into the wet weather storage. The way it is built.
No wonder I didn't know the answer to that. And then the follow-up question that he's also asked twice is, how much, in terms of gallons, how much does the entire IPS outside the actual storage facilities hold? And there was no way I could calculate this. I'm not an engineer.
Yeah, I'll not be able to answer you offhand, but we can get back to you on that, as how much the pipes all the way from Portola until the plant. What is the storage in those pipelines? Is that what you want?
Yes, please.
Okay, we can do that.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, moving on to the attorney's report, item 6.
Okay, just very briefly, there's been a lot of chatter about AB 361 right now. We're meeting under AB 361 virtually. And one of the things you have to have in order to continue to meet under AB 361 is a state of emergency declaration, or at least, well, I shouldn't say that. There is a basis for doing, you need one of two things to continue to meet, either a state of emergency declaration, presumably by the governor, or a requirement for social distancing by state or local officials. Right now, the requirements for social distancing seem to be being repealed or not currently being required by either state or local agencies. It is unclear if the governor on March 31st is going to let the state of emergency lapse. On Friday, there was, the governor rescinded quite a few of the executive orders that, suspended certain laws related to COVID. but he did not suspend the state of emergency. And there was quite a bit of criticism from the other party about why he didn't, right? So right now, I don't know if on March 31st, if the state of emergency is going to lapse. My hunch is it's not going to. I think it'll continue, which will allow these types of meetings to continue. But if it does, we're going to have a discussion as a board about whether we can make other kinds of findings that would allow virtual meetings to continue. If not, everyone's going to have to come back, start meeting in person again. And I've talked to my other colleagues as to what other agencies were going to do in the event that it lapses, and you know, there's some potential creative solutions out there, but I think most agencies are likely to go back to in-person meetings. So anyway, I just wanted to raise that issue and answer any questions, but that's where things currently stand. And it's a very dynamic, fluid situation. So that's
I would ask whether that is something to add to the agenda of the board ops committee.
That would be certainly appropriate if that's the chair's desire.
To discuss options for meeting, you know, under a couple of different scenarios.
Yeah, one thing that people don't necessarily think about, but it is an option, is even before COVID, there was an option for remote meetings. It was just clunkier, right? So there was just a requirement to do postings. So in each agenda, if someone wanted to participate remotely, they could do it. But you had to say on the agenda where the person was going to be participating remotely, and perhaps even more burdensome, if the public wanted to show up at that location, you had to let them in, which means if you were doing it in your living room, you know, someone knocked on your door and said, hey, I want to participate in the meeting, you had to let them do it. Now, realistically, that almost never happened. Although there was one time at the Sheraton, Grand Sheraton in Sacramento, where I actually had 2 people show up to a remote location. So I was like, okay, I can't say that no one ever shows up. It does happen, but so that is an option. After we revert back to the old rules, it's just more burdensome, and people have to be willing to interface with the public directly at their remote location.
There is your home address.
There is a bill that's on Half Moon Bay's legislative matrix item at our city council meeting tomorrow night that says that, given the situation, you do not have to notice the personal address or contact information for the council member who's teleconferencing from their home. So it's a bill to shield that information, basically.
Well, actually, with Zoom and other platforms like we have now, that actually makes a lot more sense, right? Because if you're a member of the public and you want to participate, you can do it from anywhere, and board members can do it from anywhere, and you're really not missing anything. Whereas before, if you had somebody on a phone participating, okay, it looks like somebody posted, Michelle Dragon, he just posted in the chat. So anyway, but that, I think, Madam Chair, that would be a good idea for the board ops committee to discuss.
I think it's a perfect role for them if they'd like to do that. Barbara?
I'd just like to note that the members of the community have expressed appreciation for the ability to attend government meetings without having to get up and go down. Future that benefits the community.
Well, let me clarify one point, though. The lapse of the state of emergency and some of the AB 361 authorities, that wouldn't stop SAM from still having virtual meetings. They could still do that, and the public could still participate just like they are here. The difference would be the board members would have to be present at SAM, and then you could have you could have it broadcast, and then people could still participate virtually. But it would be different, right? It would be different than when everyone's participating from a remote location. Just a different dynamic.
Half Moon Bay is probably going to hybrid meetings beginning in May. We haven't made it official yet, but that's what we're discussing.
Yeah.
Scott?
Okay, I thought Barbara had her hand up first, but I'll make it quick. Just a technical matter. Only a quorum needs to be in person, correct?
right now, well,
even
okay.
under prior.
So under the normal rules, a majority of the legislative body has to participate in the meeting from within the boundaries of the district or of the authority in our case, which can still be remote. It just has to be so, but if people are participating from, remote locations out of state or outside of SAM, would have to participate from within SAM.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
Okay. I had one, Madam Chair, I have one other item just really quickly. And this is just something that I don't know if folks are following this, but there is legislation. One of the things the EPA is doing is working on both drinking water regulations involving PFAS. For those who don't understand or not familiar with PFAS, Scotch Guard, a lot of the chemicals that have been really very commonplace in people's lives. And it turns out, after decades of use, that maybe some of them are pretty harmful after all. And so there's been a real push in the last few years by the regulatory agencies to really get a handle, particularly in California. California's been very aggressive. And one of the solutions that EPA has been going after is listing some of these perfluorinated substances, particularly two called PFOA and PFOS, listing them as hazardous substances under CERCLA, which is called Superfund. It's the big cleanup legislation that allows cost recovery, and in the past has led to a lot of litigation. Historically, one of the main producers of PFAS is wastewater plants, because there's so much, even if there's no one discharging, no chemical dischargers into the wastewater plants, there's so much bioaccumulation of these perfluorinated substances in people's bodies that they wind up in the wastewater stream. And so the levels that are considered safe are so low that just, having wastewater discharges can be cause for regulatory concern. Less so for ocean discharges. So in the case of SAM, it's probably less of a concern. But there is a move afoot through congressional action to obtain an exemption for water and wastewater districts who are essentially complying with the law and who haven't done their own. So anyway, that's something that's ongoing right now. I'm working on drafting amendments for a different agency, and I just wanted to make the board aware that that's a current event that may have some impact on SAM in the future.
Interesting. Apparently, there's also a bill that would do away with the State Water Resources Control Board.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm not sure what prompted that, but I don't know. The State Water Board is pretty popular with a lot of people. I don't know. Maybe not the two legislators who, or it was three who co-sponsored to merge it with DWR, right? Wasn't that the idea?
Yeah, it's called it's called an update. They want to update how we handle it, but it's basically to get rid of the state board. Yeah.
I don't see that going anywhere, but I'm keeping an open mind. I guess we'll see what happens. Yeah. Yep. So that's all I have for my report. Thank you.
I need directors with reports. Seeing none. Topics for future board consideration? Seeing none, I will ask that we adjourn to closed session.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Night.